So, welcome back everyone again to the continuation of our series on budgeting and budgetary control. Today, we'll be looking at another budgetary control techniques called incremental budgeting techniques. In the last section and series on budgetary control, we were able to look at a budgeting technique called zero-based budgeting, where budget is actually developed from zero. Budget is developed from the scratch. Budget is developed from the beginning. There is no addition to previous year's budget. No. Everything that has to do with previous year is closed. And for a new year or an annual operational budget, a special budgeting approach is used, which actually captures from the scratch to the end. But today, we'll be looking at another budgeting techniques that we call incremental budgeting. Incremental budgeting. What do we refer to as incremental budgeting? This is a budgeting technique where the previous period's budget is used as a basis for preparing the current period budget. So listen, the previous period budget, the previous year's budget are not disposed, they are actually factored into the new year or the another year, the current year budgeting. But this time around, an incremental adjustment is made so as to be able to cater for some factors like inflation, expansion needs, or growth needs. So in incremental budgeting, we don't dispose the previous year's budgeted figure, rather we actually factor it into the current year budget. So this time around, we actually take a percentage which we actually use to increase the previous year's budget, so that to be able to factor in some adjustment for inflation, for expansion, or for growth needs. So in incremental budget, as the name implies, is an increment. We are still using the previous year's budget, but this time around, we are adding some allowances to it. So, making it to be able to be robust enough to cater for some factors in the current year, which are not allowed for in the previous year. So, unlike the zero-based budget, where everything is taken up from the scratch, incremental budget is not like that. So, you need to understand the distinction between these different techniques as they may be tested by your examiners in the exam condition. Now, we look at what are the different merits or advantages of incremental budget. Number one, it is simple to apply in practice. So, one of the merits of incremental budget is that they are simple to apply. You know, you want to prepare a budget now, you are not disturbing yourself, you just brought the previous year's budget. Let's assume that the personnel cost budget is actually 10,000 naira in last year. And we have already reached a consensus that on all revenue centers this year, or on all departments, we only make an addition or an allowance or an increment of 10%. Definitely, if last year's budget is actually 10,000 naira, this year will actually be 11,000 naira for personnel cost. Because the 10% of 10,000 naira is actually 1,000 naira. So we add this 1,000 naira to actually make up for the allowances such as inflation, expansion, growth needs. So this 1,000 naira caters for it, and we add it to the previous year's budget to make our current year budget. In other words, current year budget is actually the previous year's budget plus the allowances provided. So it's simple and straightforward to actually apply in practice. Number 2, it is actually widely accepted and used. You know, I told you it's very simple to apply, so actually it is going to be widely accepted. As a matter of fact, even in the public sector, these had been their budgeting techniques. But currently, there's an evolution that zero-based budget should actually be adopted. Though ZBB is more time-consuming and effort-demanding compared to incremental budget. Then, what are the demerits or what are the disadvantages of the implementation of incremental budget? Number 1, the budget perpetuates past inefficiencies. Don't forget, one of the merits or one of those things that zero-based budget tends to cancel out or eliminate is inefficiency. But in incremental budgets, the inefficient revenue center or department that have been budgeted for in previous year will also be directly carried forward into the current year, because there is no set of committee, there is no set of measures or controls that tend to look at the efficiencies of these centers. So, in other words, the previous inefficiencies, previous forms of inactiveness that have been provided for in previous year will also be carried forward into the current year. And in other words, this will lead to wasteful expenditure. Another disadvantage of incremental budget is it does not lead to the optimal and efficient allocation of budgetary resources. You know, as we said in number 1, that inefficient operations are also catered in for bring forward or carried forward into the current year. It means there will be allocation of resources to all these inefficiencies also. All these inefficiencies whereby we will not actually be working with an optimal resource allocation. So these are the demerits of incremental budgeting. The last form of budgetary control techniques that I'll be looking at is what we refer to as activity-based costing techniques. So what we call activity-based costing system or activity-based costing budgeting techniques, or in other words, we could call it ABB, activity-based budgeting. What's an activity-based budgeting? This is a budgetary system of managing cost by controlling activities that drive cost or activities that cause cost to be incurred. Under activity-based budgeting, there is a close watch, there is a close inspection on not majorly the cost, not majorly the budget, not majorly what we actually expect to incur, but which activities would cause this cost to be incurred. There is first a study on this activity, on how this activity can be optimally regulated in such a way that at the end we'll be efficiently incurring our cost. So it's a form of budgetary system that actually controls the activities that produces cost. So in other words, when the means is controlled, then the ends is actually achieved in an optimal way. It does not look at the ends, but also the means to the ends. That's using an economics approach. So it does not look at majorly the cost, but how do we actually optimize the activities in such a way that the cost will actually be reduced. This is what activity-based costing is all about, or what we refer to as activity-based budgeting. Now, examples of these activities, or what we refer to as cost driver, note, they are also referred to as cost driver. By the time we are taking some workings under performance management, PM, we'll be looking at what we refer to as cost driver. Examples of this cost driver or activities are machine setup hours is an activity. When it's actually optimized or studied well, we'll actually be able to reduce the amount of hours that we spend on our machine. You know, probably maybe the idle time of our staff, or the machine breakdown, and the rest like that. So, whereby, as a result of that, all costs attached to these machine hours will then be significantly reduced. That is the distinction between ABC and other budgetary control system. Another activity driver is number of purchase orders received or raised. So this everything about activity-based costing. Now, other forms of budgeting and of budgetary control system that we have, or techniques that we have, is what we call periodic or continuous budget. Then there's another one we also refer to as planning, programming, and budgetary system, PPBS. But the most popularly and widely known one are ZBB, zero-based budgeting, incremental budgeting, ABB, activity-based budgeting, and the likes. So thank you for coming to the end of this lecture series on budgeting and budgetary control. Don't forget, share this video with your professional colleagues, like our videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and watch out on our website on LearnCity.ng. Thank you and God bless you.